It was the kind of night that sticks with you long after you've closed the file. I remember the clock on the office wall glowing 12:17 a.m. when the call came through. A missing woman, 28 years old, last seen leaving a small-town bar off Highway 41, just outside of Tall Pines, Missouri. A quiet place, surrounded by woods and cornfields, the kind of town where people still left their doors unlocked, and everyone knew the sheriff by name. I was still new to the bureau back then. My badge didn't carry the weight it does now, and I was still learning the rhythm of small-town cases, how fast rumors spread, how truth got twisted by fear. When the dispatcher patched me through to the local sheriff, his voice was steady, but I could hear the fatigue underneath. "She left around midnight," he said. "Bartender saw her walk out alone. Car's still in the lot. Purse, jacket, phone, all inside. Her name was Laura Kincaid. Schoolteacher. No criminal record. No known enemies. No reason to vanish into the night. But something about the way the sheriff said it, walked out alone, told me he didn't believe that part either. By the time I pulled into Tall Pines, dawn was just starting to gray the sky. The air was thick with that early morning humidity that settles over the Midwest in late August. A sheriff's cruiser was parked outside the Pine Tap, lights still flashing in the empty lot. Two deputies stood by a rust-red Toyota Corolla, notebooks out, coffee cups balanced on the hood. The scene looked calm, but there was a quiet unease hanging over it. Inside the car, Laura's life was frozen mid-motion. Half a bottle of water in the cup holder, a tote bag on the passenger seat filled with papers graded in red ink, lip balm, keys still in the ignition, turned halfway. It was as if she'd meant to come back, maybe to grab her phone, maybe to drive home, but something pulled her away before she could. The bartender, a man named Eddie, looked like he hadn't slept. He told me Laura came in around 10, ordered a whiskey sour, and sat by the jukebox alone. She stayed about 2 hours, talked briefly to a man in a baseball cap near closing time. When the bar lights came on, she walked out first. The man left a few minutes later. Eddie couldn't remember what kind of car he drove, but he swore it wasn't local. There were no cameras outside, no witnesses beyond a few regulars, and their memories were soaked in alcohol and late-night haze. We pulled the phone records. Nothing unusual. A few texts from a friend around 11:30, nothing after midnight. The last outgoing call was to her sister. Voicemail. The message was short. "Hey, I'm about to head home. I'll call you tomorrow." She never did. For the first 48 hours, it followed the same pattern as most disappearances. We canvassed the area, combed the woods, checked the nearby motel and gas station. Volunteers came out with flashlights and botampod spray, their faces drawn tight with the kind of dread you don't want to name out loud. By day 3, the local sheriff called us back. He'd found something. A shoe. It was lodged in the mud near the edge of Old Mill Road, 2 miles from the bar. Size 7, tan leather. The same kind Laura was wearing that night. There were drag marks near it, faint but visible in the morning dew. No tire tracks, no footprints beyond that. Just one shoe and a trail that disappeared into the tree line. When we searched that patch of woods, it felt like walking into a different world. The canopy closed in overhead, the air still and heavy, cicadas screaming in the branches. I remember the crunch of leaves under our boots, the smell of damp soil, and something faintly metallic. For hours, we found nothing but broken branches and cigarette butts. Then one of the deputies called out. A scarf, pale blue, torn on one end. It was caught on a low branch like it had been ripped away in a struggle. We bagged it carefully and sent it to the lab. Later that week, the report came back. Traces of blood, type O negative. Laura's type. That was the moment the missing person case became a federal one. We widened the search radius, brought in dogs, helicopters, even volunteer divers for the nearby creek. The town turned inside out, people locking their doors, keeping their kids home, whispering about who might be next. Local news ran her picture for weeks. Blonde hair, green eyes, soft smile. The kind of face that could belong to anyone's daughter. But as days turned to weeks, something in the case refused to settle. Every lead went cold too fast. Every sighting turned out to be nothing. We were chasing ghosts through a field of rumors. Then, on the 12th day, a call came from the state forensic lab. They'd lifted partial prints off the scarf, not Laura's, not a match in the state database either. But one of the analysts noticed something strange. The pattern of residue on the fabric wasn't just blood. It was something oily, synthetic, almost like machine grease. They'd seen it before, once in another case file. A file from 8 years earlier. Same county, same type of fabric, same partial print pattern, a different missing woman. Her name was Rachel Mendez, 24, disappeared in 1992 under nearly identical circumstances. Left a bar after midnight. Car found abandoned near a county road. A single item of clothing discovered nearby. The case went cold after 6 months. When I compared the photos side by side, Rachel's torn cardigan and Laura's scarf, I felt that creeping chill that every investigator knows. Same tear pattern, same residue. The official report from 1992 mentioned something else. An unidentified pickup truck seen near the bar around closing time. Light blue. Rust along the bumper. Eddie, the bartender, had said the man Laura talked to drove something that wasn't local. I went back to him that night, showed him a lineup of vehicles. When he pointed to the photo of that same light blue pickup, his hand trembled. "That's the one," he said. "I remember now. That's the one he drove." It felt like the room went quiet all at once. The jukebox stopped mid-song. The neon signs buzzed in the background. We had a connection. 2 women, same pattern, same county, same kind of car. 8 years apart. But whoever did it had stayed hidden all this time, buried somewhere in the cracks between 2 decades of case files. I didn't know it then, but reopening that old file would unravel more than just one disappearance. It would expose something far darker, something that reached deeper than a single missing woman. And it started with what we found buried in the evidence box the next morning. A cassette tape labeled Interview Witness 3 1992. It wasn't listed in the digital record. No one seemed to know who had recorded it. When I played it, the voice on the tape shook. You could hear the fear in every word. He said she wasn't the first. The tape cut off there. That was when I realized we weren't looking for a missing person anymore. We were chasing a ghost that had learned how to hide in plain sight, and we had just pulled the first thread. I replayed that tape more times than I care to admit. Each time, I'd lean closer, trying to catch a breath, a word, anything before it cut out. But it always ended the same way. That voice, trembling, saying, "He said she wasn't the first." Then silence, the kind that lingers. The next morning, I went to the archives room in the old county courthouse. It smelled of dust and paper glue, the air thick with years of forgotten files. The 1992 case folder for Rachel Mendez was half rotted from moisture, pages sticking together. Whoever handled it last hadn't expected anyone to open it again. Inside, the witness list was short. 3 names. One was crossed out in red pen. The third one, the one labeled Witness 3, had no address, no statement, nothing but a first name written in shaky blue ink. Caleb. I called the former lead investigator on that case, a man named Richard Holcomb. He'd retired 5 years earlier and moved to Arkansas. When I reached him by phone, his voice was wary, like someone who'd been waiting for a call like mine, but hoped it would never come. I told them to keep that tape out of circulation, he said. That boy was half crazy, seeing things in the woods, hearing things that weren't there. But when he mentioned the truck, I'll admit, it gave me chills. What happened to him? I asked. Disappeared. A few weeks after Rachel. No body, no trace. Just gone. The line went quiet for a long moment before Holcomb spoke again. If you're reopening that case, be careful who you talk to. We were told to drop it. Orders came from higher up. Said the kid's story didn't check out. That was the first time I felt the weight of something bigger pressing down on this case. Something off the record. I started pulling phone logs from the night Laura vanished. Between midnight and 1 a.m., 2 calls pinged off the nearest cell tower. One belonged to Eddie's bar. The other was registered to an unlisted number that traced back to an old salvage yard outside town. Dixon Auto Parts, closed since 1996. When we drove out there, the place was half swallowed by weeds. Rusted cars sat stacked like gravestones, the metal creaking in the wind. A faded sign leaned crooked by the gate. You could still smell oil in the dirt, the kind that seeps in deep and never really fades. We found the small office at the back, locked but not secure. Inside, dust covered everything. Papers, license plates, coffee cups. On the wall hung a calendar from 1994, frozen in time. My partner, a quiet guy named Mason, noticed something wedged behind a filing cabinet. A cassette recorder, cracked and grimy. We bagged it and sent it for analysis, but I already knew what we'd find. The same kind of tape, same handwriting. Back at the motel that night, I couldn't shake the sense that we were walking in someone else's footsteps, someone who'd gone missing for knowing too much. The next morning, Mason called me from the field office. The lab confirmed it. The recorder matched the tape from 1992. There were faint fingerprints on the plastic casing, degraded but partially usable. They weren't in any system. We went back through both case files, Rachel and Laura, and built a side-by-side timeline. That's when a new pattern emerged. Each woman had reported car trouble in the weeks leading up to their disappearance. Laura's Corolla had been serviced at a small mechanics shop downtown called Carter's Garage. Rachel's file mentioned a similar repair invoice from the same shop 8 years earlier, though the ownership had changed hands since. We decided to pay a visit. Carter's Garage sat on the edge of town, one of those places with an old Coke machine out front, and country music leaking through the open bay door. Inside, the air smelled of rubber and gasoline. A tall man in his 60s wiped his hands on a rag and eyed our badges. "You fellas hear about that girl?" he asked. I nodded. He sighed and leaned against a workbench. "I figured this might come back someday. I bought this place off a guy named Roy Benson in '97. Roy's the one who worked on both those cars. He left town after the first case went cold. No forwarding address. Rumor was he got in trouble down south. Something about stolen parts. Do you know where he might have gone? Not sure. Heard he had family near Lake Norwood. Big property out there, lot of land. Folks kept to themselves. We ran the name through the system. Nothing popped up. Not in Missouri, not in Arkansas, not anywhere in the Midwest. But old property tax records showed something curious. A tract of land by Lake Norwood, purchased under a different name just a year after Rachel disappeared. The buyer's middle initial matched RB. When we drove out to Lake Norwood that afternoon, the sky was gray and heavy with rain. The road narrowed into gravel, bordered by thick woods that seemed to close in the deeper we went. Eventually, we came to a rusted gate marked with a no trespassing sign. Beyond it sat a weathered farmhouse, its windows boarded from the inside. We approached quietly, flashlights cutting through the drizzle. The porch sagged under our weight. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale and still. Empty beer cans on the counter, a pile of newspapers by the wall. But in the back room, behind a curtain of dust and cobwebs, we found something that stopped us cold. A wall covered in photographs. Women's faces, smiling. Some of them torn from newspapers, others Polaroids. Each photo pinned beside a scrap of fabric. Ribbon, lace, scarf. Laura's face was there. Rachel's too. And below the photos, written in black marker, all accounted for. Mason swore under his breath. I could feel the hair on my neck rise. There was something methodical about it. The order, the labeling, the precision. We called it in, secured the scene, and waited for the evidence team. But before they arrived, I noticed a trap door in the corner, half covered by a rug. It led to a cellar. The air down there was colder, the smell sharper. Shelves lined the walls, jars, tools, boxes. In one corner, a wooden workbench stained with something dark. But what caught my attention was a single object resting on the table, an old cassette tape. No label this time. I pocketed it, knowing the chain of custody would catch up later. Something in my gut told me this one mattered. When we played it back at the field office, the voice was unmistakable. It was the same woman from the first tape, terrified, pleading. But this time, there was more before it cut out. "You said you fixed my car," she whispered. "Please, I just want to go home." Then came a man's voice, calm, deep, unhurried. "You shouldn't have looked in the box." Static followed. Then the tape ended. That moment changed everything. We now had proof that at least one of the missing women had been alive long enough to speak on record after her disappearance, and that someone, most likely Roy Benson, had recorded it. But there was a problem. According to local death records, Roy Benson had been declared legally dead in 1999. And yet, the tape we found had been recorded on a model that wasn't released until 2001. That meant either someone was using his name, or Roy Benson had never really died. When we sent the fingerprints from the recorder to the FBI's national database, the system flagged a possible match, but it was under a different alias. Darren Cole. Cole had worked for a small auto salvage company in Illinois until 2003, when he vanished after a warehouse fire that killed 2 employees. The fire was ruled accidental. But in the final report, one line stood out. Employee Darren Cole unaccounted for. Vehicle missing from lot. Light blue pickup truck. Mason looked at me across the table. Neither of us said a word. The man we'd been chasing, the one who'd taken Laura and Rachel, wasn't dead. He'd been moving state to state, changing names, hiding behind the wreckage he left behind. We had just uncovered a ghost with a trail of real bodies, and buried somewhere in those old case files was the clue he'd left behind. A detail so small, no one noticed it before. But we would, and it would lead us somewhere I still see when I close my eyes. Because the next place we searched wasn't a crime scene. It was a graveyard, and one of the headstones had the wrong name carved into it. I'll never forget the day we drove out to Millstone Cemetery. The sky was a dull gray, the kind that flattens everything into the same shade of silence. A storm had passed the night before, and the ground was still soft beneath our boots. Rows of old headstones leaned at strange angles, their inscriptions half faded, the names of entire families worn down by decades of wind and rain. We were there because of a single note. It came from the records division in Jefferson City, a clerk who'd been cross-checking property sales linked to our suspects' aliases. She'd found that a man named Darren Cole had purchased a burial plot in 2004, paid in cash. The headstone bore his own name. When we found it, it was simple. Just Darren Cole, 1965 to 1999. The date of death matched Roy Benson's supposed one. Someone had buried a man who didn't die, or buried someone else under his name. Either way, it meant the case wasn't about one killer anymore. It was about an identity that kept being rewritten. We called in a warrant and brought a forensic team. Watching them dig was slow torture. Each shovel of dirt made a sound like the past waking up. When they hit the coffin lid, it creaked like something giving way after years underground. Inside wasn't a body. There was a bundle wrapped in tarp. When they pulled it open, the stench of oil hit first. The same industrial scent that had clung to every piece of evidence we'd found so far. Inside were cassette tapes, dozens of them, labeled only with initials and dates. Some from the early 90s, others from just a few years earlier. It wasn't a burial site. It was a storage vault. Every single tape was evidence. Every single one could be a person. At headquarters, we set up a dedicated listening room. For hours, we sat there, headphones on, lights dim, one tape after another. Most were filled with the same quiet static, faint background noise, sometimes a voice. Always women, always pleading. Sometimes you'd catch a sound, a truck engine idling, a door creaking, music playing softly in the background. Country stations, late-night talk radio, things that anchored the horror in real time. One tape caught our attention. The label read LK 2003, Laura Kincaid. Her voice was faint but clear. She was asking questions, calm at first, then breaking. "You said this wasn't about me," she said. "Why am I here?" Then a pause, a man's breath close to the mic. "Because you looked in the box." That same phrase again, the same cold certainty. I stopped the playback and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "What box?" I asked out loud, though I didn't expect an answer. Mason rewound the tape, trying to pick up ambient sound. He isolated a faint metallic clink, then what sounded like paper being folded. When he boosted the volume, we both froze. There was another voice in the background, a woman's, older, whispering something we couldn't make out. Then the man again. "She shouldn't be here." It wasn't just one person. He wasn't working alone. Over the next week, we followed every lead those tapes gave us. Some voices we identified, others we couldn't. But one pattern kept showing up, a reference to something called the collection. It came up 4 times, in tapes spanning a decade. One woman said, "You said I'd be part of the collection." Another whispered, "He keeps everything." It sounded ritualistic, almost organized, not the ramblings of a lone killer. We sent the labels for handwriting analysis. The same person had written all of them, which meant whoever he was had been operating across multiple states for at least 10 years, always changing names, always staying a step ahead. When we mapped the locations of the disappearances that matched the initials on the tapes, a shape began to form. A slow migration northward, from Missouri to Illinois, then up through Wisconsin and into Michigan. It wasn't random. It followed old trade routes, abandoned highways, places where scrap yards and rail lines still cut through empty towns. That's when Mason noticed something that made the whole room go quiet. Each town had a Dixon Auto subsidiary listed in its county records. Some had long been closed, others sold off to new owners. But the parent name was always the same, even if the managers changed. We ran incorporation records, all fake, with one accountant listed across every one of them. H. Cole. I called Holcomb again, the retired investigator from the original 1992 case. When I told him the name, he cursed under his breath. "Harlan Cole," he said. "That was Roy's brother. Used to run the books for him back when they did mechanic work together. Everyone thought he left after the fire." So there were 2 of them. One who fixed the cars, one who handled the money. A partnership hiding behind a family name. We got a warrant for Harlan's last known address, a small house on the outskirts of Davenport, Iowa. The place looked abandoned. Mail piled up, grass waist high. Inside, it smelled of mildew and rust. But in the basement, we found something that turned the case into a nightmare. A metal locker. Inside, stacks of photographs, invoices and maps, and a ledger bound in cracked leather. On the cover, in neat handwriting, "Inventory." Inside were pages of entries, initials, dates, brief notes. Recovered, damaged, archived, and under the final column, a code, D01 through D488. We didn't know what it meant until we noticed a corresponding list in the back labeled Dixon Lot. There were 48 entries, 48 possible victims, and beside entry D43LK was a simple note, delivered to Lake House. We knew where we were going next. The lake house sat 2 miles off the shore of Lake Norwood, reachable only by an unmarked service road. We went in with a full team this time. When we arrived, the rain had started again, slow and steady. The house was small, 1 story, windows blacked out. The door was locked, but not reinforced. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the scent of mildew and gasoline. We found evidence of recent activity, food wrappers, cigarette butts, footprints in the dust. Someone had been there within days. But what froze everyone in place was what we found in the back room. A collection of wooden crates stacked neatly along the wall, each one stenciled with a number, D01 through D43. We pried open one of them. Inside was a sealed envelope. When I opened it, a single Polaroid fell out. A woman's face, terrified, mid-scream. Underneath it, a folded piece of blue fabric. Her scarf. We opened another crate. Then another. Each one was the same. A photograph, a small personal item, a piece of clothing. All women, all missing. It was an archive of lives erased, but one crate was different. It wasn't sealed. Inside Intimoa, instead of a photograph, there was a cassette tape and a note that read, "End of collection." We played the tape right there on a field recorder. The sound was distorted, but one voice came through clear. The same man's voice we'd heard before. "They wanted to know what happened," he said. "So I showed them. Every one of them wanted to see what was in the box." Then a pause, a faint breath. "Now it's your turn." The tape ended with footsteps and the sound of a door closing. There was no timestamp, no location data, no signature. But the recorder it was made on, the model, had been discontinued only 2 years ago, which meant the man we thought was dead was still out there, still recording, still collecting. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years of chasing monsters through paperwork and evidence lockers. He was watching us. The morning after we found the lake house, the air around the investigation changed. The case wasn't just about a killer anymore. It was about control. Someone who had spent years turning his crimes into a system. The press didn't know it yet, and neither did the families of the missing. But for us, every hour that passed felt like time we were already too late to recover. The forensics team cataloged the crates for 2 full days. 43 boxes, 43 victims confirmed through cross-referenced DNA and missing persons reports. 5 boxes were empty, numbered, but unsealed, as if waiting for their next entries. That detail stayed with me more than anything else. It told me he wasn't finished. We traced every connection between the Cole brothers, their fake businesses, and the Dixon auto chain. Most of the trails ended in cash transactions, false IDs, or property bought under shell companies. But one record stood out. A storage lease in Iron County, signed just 6 months earlier under the name D. Carter, another alias tied to Benson's handwriting. We moved in before sunrise. The unit was in an industrial park behind an old textile mill. Cold, windless, and too quiet. The lock was new. When we cut it open and lifted the door, the smell of gasoline and mold poured out. Inside were car parts stacked to the ceiling, all tagged with dates and initials. There were personal items too. Wallets, jewelry, driver's licenses, arranged on a workbench with unsettling precision. Mason found something half buried under a tarp, a small wooden box, the kind you'd find in a jewelry shop. Inside was a strip of film, rolled tight. We developed it on site using portable equipment, and the images that surfaced felt like ghosts caught mid-breath, blurred faces, night woods, headlights cutting through fog. Each frame dated, each location tagged with coordinates. They weren't just trophies. They were documentation, evidence of method. On one photo, in the bottom right corner, someone had scribbled 2 letters. R.B. Roy Benson wasn't gone. He was documenting every act, as if he believed it mattered that the record existed. I couldn't shake that thought when we left the scene. On the drive back, the sky broke open into a steady rain. The wipers dragged in rhythm with the heartbeat of the case. Slow, relentless. Mason was quiet beside me, his face washed gray by the road lights. "Why keep all of it?" he finally said. "Why hide the tapes, the photos, the evidence? Why not burn it?" "Because it's not about hiding," I said. "It's about remembering." He turned to me. "You think he wanted to be caught?" "No, I think he wanted to be known." That idea became the hinge of everything that came next. 2 days later, A local woman came forward after seeing the FBI vans in town. She said she'd once worked at the Dixon salvage yard years ago when she was 16. The owner, she remembered, paid in cash and never used his real name. He had a habit of recording things: calls, customers, even his employees. "What kind of things?" I asked. "Anything that scared people," she said. He liked the way fear sounded. We played her one of the recovered tapes. Not the voices, just the background hum. When the faint buzz of static filled the air, she froze. "That's it," she said. "That's what used to play in his office. He said it helped him think." We tracked her employment records. They showed the salvage yard had been inspected once, back in 1998, after a complaint about chemical runoff. The inspector's name was redacted in the file, but when we requested the original report from the state archive, the name came through clear: H. Cole. The brothers had created a loop, one covering for the other, one keeping the books, one collecting. Each inspection, each false death certificate, each property transfer had been filed cleanly through state systems. They didn't just build a cover. They built bureaucracy around their crimes. And somewhere in that paper trail was the moment they slipped through it. For the last time. Mason found it first. A death certificate filed in Illinois under Roy Benson, dated 2008. The attending physician was listed as Dr. Henry Cole. Same handwriting, same signature pattern. The body, according to the file, had been cremated due to advanced decomposition. No physical remains ever logged. We contacted the crematorium. Their manager, an older man named Patterson, said he remembered that case, but not the body. "I got the paperwork," he said, "but no delivery. They said the transport broke down before it got here. A couple days later, someone from the coroner's office called to confirm it had been handled off-site." We checked the coroner's log. No such call was ever made. The line of truth had broken there, between one form signed and another filed away. That's when I realized we weren't chasing someone who'd vanished. We were chasing someone who'd buried himself alive in the paperwork, one falsified death at a time. We went back to the tapes. I listened to them again, start to finish, trying to hear what we'd missed. Somewhere around the 20th tape, I caught something faint in the background. A bell. It rang 3 times, far away, but clear. Mason pulled up the sound spectrogram. It matched the frequency range of a church bell, one specific model manufactured in the 1970s and installed in less than a dozen churches across Missouri and southern Illinois. One of them sat just a mile from Lake Norwood. Another stood outside a town called Franklin Ridge, where the last Dixon auto site had closed in 2006. We drove there the next morning. Franklin Ridge felt empty, the kind of place that dies slow. The main street was all boarded windows and faded signs. But the church was still standing, tall white steeple, weathered paint, and a cracked bell that hung like an artifact from another life. Behind it stretched a line of trees, and beyond that, a small maintenance shed with the door ajar. Inside, the air was cold and dry. Dust drifted through the light from a broken window. On the table was another tape recorder, still running, the reel turning without sound. Next to it sat a single Polaroid. It was taken from the back of the room, an image of 2 men standing by a row of cars. The one on the left was Mason. I felt my stomach twist. We called it in immediately, secured the area, swept the grounds. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints beyond our own. The recorder had been placed there within hours of our arrival. Whoever left it had been watching. The tape had 1 minute of audio, just breathing. Then a voice, calm, measured, and close to the mic. "You're still looking," it said. "Good. That's what I wanted." Then nothing. He was alive, and he was nearby. We locked down the town, set up roadblocks, combed through every vacant property. But it was like chasing smoke. Every lead dissolved into dead air. The few locals who still lived there said they'd seen a blue pickup pass through days earlier. One remembered the driver. Older, gray beard, baseball cap. Said he smiled when he asked for directions. To the old Mill Road, the same road where Rachel Mendez vanished 13 years before. By then, I could feel the case tightening, like something breathing just out of sight. Each clue led us in circles, each tape a message meant to draw us closer. And it worked. Because the next day, one of our field vehicles was found abandoned at the edge of the woods. Engine running, doors open. Mason's badge was on the seat. When they called me about the truck, I was already on my way back from headquarters. The radio crackled with static before the dispatcher's voice came through. Sharp, thin, too calm for what she was saying. "Unit 7 located. Engine still warm. No sign of Agent Mason." I pulled off the highway and drove straight toward Franklin Ridge. The sun was slipping behind the trees when I reached the old service road. The air smelled of rain and fuel, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of cicadas bled into the wind. Mason's vehicle sat at the edge of the woods, headlights still on, cutting through a haze of mist. His door was open. Inside, his flashlight lay on the floorboard, still flickering. There was no struggle, no blood, no sign of where he'd gone. Just a trail of boot prints leading off toward the tree line. And beside them, another set. Smaller, older tread. They led into the woods, fading with the mud. I followed, radio in one hand, weapon drawn in the other. The light broke in scattered beams through the branches, the forest growing darker with every step. About half a mile in, I found a clearing, an open patch of ground littered with debris and rusted metal. In the center stood an old truck, light blue, half sunk into the earth. The same kind of truck that had followed both women the nights they vanished. When I opened the driver's door, I saw something sitting on the seat. A cassette tape, unmarked, and underneath it, Mason's badge. I radioed for backup and waited. The waiting felt useless. The woods were too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. After a few minutes, I gave in and played the tape. It started with silence. Then, slowly, a voice. Deep, rasped. The same one we'd heard before. "You've been looking for me," it said. "Now you're where they all were." There was movement in the background. Footsteps, water dripping, a faint metallic echo. Then another sound, quieter, closer to the mic. A muffled breath. "Mason." I froze. His voice came through next, unsteady but alive. "You don't have to do this." The man laughed, low and tired. "You think this is about choice?" Static crackled, and then a thud, like something heavy hitting the ground. The recording cut off mid-breath. When the backup team arrived, we swept the area inch by inch. The truck was registered to an old salvage title in Illinois, another alias tied to the same fake ID trail. In the bed, under a tarp, we found a toolbox sealed with rust. Inside were 6 tapes. The first 5 matched missing persons cases from the last 10 years. The 6th was labeled simply M. We took everything back to the field office. Forensics worked through the night, matching tire impressions, prints, trace fibers. But the one thing that mattered most, where Mason was, stayed blank. The tape labeled M had been wiped clean, overwritten with hours of static. The next morning, a call came from the sheriff's office in Iron County. A man had been spotted driving a blue pickup down Highway 16 before dawn. He'd stopped for gas, paid in cash, and left before anyone could note the plates. The clerk remembered one thing: a sticker on the back window, a faded logo for Dixon Auto Parts. We sent alerts statewide, checked every salvage yard within 100 miles. By sunset, we had a dozen reports of similar trucks, all dead ends. That night, I sat in my motel room listening to the tapes again. Not the ones we'd recovered before, but a new set found in the truck's glove compartment. These weren't confessions or recordings of victims. They were messages, addressed directly to whoever would find them. "You want to make this a story," the man said on one of them. "That's what you people do. You take what's real and turn it into noise. You think if you name it, you own it. But I've seen what happens when you start looking too close. It looks back." I didn't sleep. I kept hearing the last words from that first anonymous voice on the 1992 tape. He said she wasn't the first. Back then, I thought it meant there were more victims. Now I wasn't so sure. When dawn came, we got a hit. A camera at a toll booth near the Iowa border caught a light blue pickup passing through just after midnight. The driver's face was partially visible. It wasn't Roy Benson. It wasn't Harlan either. It was someone older, heavier, but with the same eyes. We traced the plates to a property outside Cedar Rapids, a farm that had been vacant for years. By the time we arrived, the truck was there, parked out front. The front door stood open. Inside, the house was empty except for one thing: a table in the center of the room, covered with a white sheet. On it, a tape recorder and a single sheet of paper. The note read, "You found the end of the trail, but not the end of the story." Then a name I didn't recognize: Daniel H. Cole, another brother. Or a son. I pressed play. The tape hissed, then a voice, calm, detached, recorded recently. "My father kept everything," it said. "Every face, every sound. He said the world forgot too easily, that someone had to remember the truth about what people really are. He taught me to keep the collection safe, to finish what he couldn't." A pause. "You shouldn't have come here." The recording ended with the sound of an engine starting outside. We ran to the porch, but by the time we hit the gravel, the blue pickup was already gone, taillights fading into the fog. That was the last verified sighting. No further traces, no new tapes, no new victims, at least none we've found. Mason's case remains open, his file marked missing, presumed deceased. The Cole family line splintered across 4 aliases, 3 death certificates, and too many unanswered questions. Sometimes, late at night, I go back to those recordings. Not to listen for voices, but for what's underneath. The hum of a motor, the creak of a door, the echo of footsteps in a place we never found. Every time, I think I hear something new. A breath, a shift in the air. Like whoever made them is still out there, waiting for someone else to press play. People always ask if I believe he's alive. The truth is, I don't know. Some days, I hope he is, because if he's dead, it means everything we found, all those lives boxed and labeled, ends in silence. But if he's still out there, maybe that silence means something else. Maybe it means the story isn't over. And maybe one day, somewhere out on a back road, another investigator will find a tape, slide it into a player, and hear what I did that first night. A voice in the dark, saying the same words that started it all. She wasn't the first. If you liked this story, please subscribe to the channel for more true crime mysteries.